This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
So, folks, we welcome an old friend of mine, Ken Khachigian, who was a chief speechwriter and a political advisor to President Reagan. He was a longtime aide and speechwriter to President Nixon. I think if such a thing is possible, Ken Khachigian might even be older than I am. I didn't know if such a thing was possible.
I'm older than everybody, Larry. Good morning.
That's the way I always feel. But anyway, he's got a new book out. It's called Behind Closed Doors, in the Room with Reagan and Nixon. Okay, I have the book. I have not yet read the book, but it's got a lot of juicy stuff in it. Ken Khachigian, one of the things we've been talking about this morning is this debate coming up on Thursday, the CNN presidential debate, Trump versus Biden. Now, you know, Nixon had debates with Kennedy and Reagan had debates with Carter and Mondale, and you were involved in all these things. So what advice would you give? What advice would you give Donald Trump, for example? Let's start there. Drawing from your experiences of many centuries of political advice, what advice would you give?
Well, for former President Trump, I think the main thing I would do is try to hold President Biden accountable, and that's the main thing, is to keep him accountable for his failures. To me, the Republicans need to have a new brand on the Democrats. I call it the DAGA brand, the Democrats Against Government Accountability. They need to be held accountable for inflation, for the border crisis, for the crime that's been rampant throughout their administration. And the best thing that President Trump could do is to keep President Biden held accountable for all the problems. You know, out here in California, which is outside the bubble that you all live in back east, Larry, I see people in real life. I see men and women at the checkout counter at the supermarkets, and you know what they're doing? They're using coupons, not food stamps, but coupons that they get out of these handouts that you get in the mail, and these are coupons that get discounts for bread and for bacon and for meats and for eggs, because they can take 10 cents off and 15 cents off because they're desperate because of the inflation that Biden has caused. And then the gas out here is, $5.50, $5.60, $5.70 a gallon. And that's because of the inflation caused during the Biden administration. So accountability is the term I would use.
Did you advise in the 80 debates, Reagan versus Carter? Were you with Reagan? Were you advising him then?
Well, I was advising him throughout the campaign. I was the chief speechwriter throughout that campaign, and when we came down to the end, I was not involved in the debate preparation, but I did have a line that I wrote for President Reagan at the Oxford Mall in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, back in early October, that you may have heard of before. Now, the line was written initially as, "Are you better off than you were in 1976?" And we changed it just a little bit in the debate, and it came off as, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And Reagan used it in the debate against Jimmy Carter, and he used it and said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And that line resonated. And then he polished it up, and in the final half-hour speech in the campaign, he not only added to it, he used it 7 or 8 times in terms of prices, in terms of inflation, in terms of mortgage rates, and he drove it home and drove it home and drove it home, and of course it ended up in a landslide victory in 1980.
Don't you think that would work for Trump?
Oh, there's no question. You ask that question for anybody. That's the other thing. Get in the car with an Uber driver.
Yeah.
And ask them what life is like. You know why there's most Uber drivers are doing this, or Lyft drivers, or whoever they are. They're doing it because they're trying to earn a second living. Mm-hmm. Because they can't make an earning on their day jobs. They're driving. They're taking these jobs to earn a decent wage so they can survive.
And Trump is saying, Ken Khachigian, Trump is saying, I'm going to make your tips tax-free. Yeah. Which is, I think, genius, brilliant.
That's very smart, because I was just on a little 3-day vacation, and these waitresses work and waiters work very, very hard, and the maids and others that you leave tips for, they work very, very hard, and I don't. That would be if they're listening to Trump, that's a genius strategy. I've got to say.
I noticed in the book, I was skimming through the book, and I do want to read the book, but I noticed in the book you almost gave me credit for teaching you economics when you were writing the Reagan tax cut speeches. It was close.
Well,
it was a very nice mention. It was a nice mention. I'll give you that.
You were a pest, Larry, because when we were working on the economic recovery plan, which saved America in 1981, to cut taxes and cut regulations, I will tell America right now, Larry Kudlow was there hovering over me, working on that speech.
Well, I was only 13 years old.
Hovering over me, making sure that the words were just precisely right to put on President Reagan's desk.
Well, I wanted the numbers right. That was my job in those days. I mean, I was a young man. I think I was 28 or 29 years old. I was the assistant budget director, but I can remember you walking into a cabinet council meeting and trying to get wisdom. That's how the first time I ever met you. But Ken Khachigian, talk just a second about Nixon. Now, you weren't with Nixon in the Kennedy debate, were you?
No.
No, you're not that old. Okay.
Not quite that old.
I got it. But let me ask you something. Nixon was a brilliant man, but he was a terrible economics president. Terrible economics. I'm going to put Watergate aside. I don't have any interest in talking about that. But, Nixon, I had Ed Cox, the son-in-law, had me meet him a couple times down at One New York Plaza, Federal Plaza, when Nixon was out of office. This is in the mid-'80s. But I just had limited, but I was very impressed with him. I read several of his books. He was very gracious to me. But his economics were terrible, Ken Khachigian. The thing I never understood, he had good people around him. He had George Shultz around him. He had Milton Friedman around him. He had Arthur Burns around him. But they did everything wrong. They spent money. They had wage and price controls.
Long Island is more exciting than ever at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel. Get ready to zoom into some serious cash with Zoom Ball every Wednesday in June. Win up to $500,000. 1 point equals 1 entry. 2 lucky winners will be drawn at the top of every hour from 1 to 5 p.m. to play Zoom Ball. Discover the excitement at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel. If gambling is a problem for you or someone, please call the 24-hour toll-free helpline at 877-8-HOPEN or text NY.